thank you for coming on. I'm excited. It's always fun to talk to someone else that has been a pastor's kid, because every
Okay.
pastor's kid has different experiences. Absolutely.
Hmm.
But we've got some similarities that, you just see a pastor kid across the room, you find out they're a pastor kid, and you're like,
Yeah.
I know, I know. On some level,
Yeah.
I know. Yeah. It's so funny.
Yeah, I didn't know you were a pastor's kid. I didn't even know you were in the UK. I thought you were in Canada for some reason. Do you get mistaken for that a lot?
uh, Not a lot, but more than I would have thought. People are like, oh, maybe Canadian. I don't know what that is, because my accent is all over the place. But yeah, it's kind of like this quasi blend of Scottish and American. And so, yeah, I guess
Oh,
people are just like,
okay.
oh, maybe Canadian. But yeah,
Did you
people
used to
know
live
I'm
in
not here.
California?
Yeah, I lived up in the north. I was in Reading as part of Bethel and
Oh,
things.
okay.
I don't know if you're familiar
You
with
were
all
part of
those.
Bethel?
Yeah, big time.
Whoa, whoa.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I don't know much about you. I feel bad. No, I'm in
It's all good.
California. I'm in
Okay,
California,
where about are you?
in
I
Central.
felt like you were. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah,
I'm in
yeah.
Bakersfield, but it's like
Okay,
Central Valley. It's like 2 hours north of LA. But I
yeah, I
grew
know
up in
Bakersfield.
yeah, I grew up in Fresno, the armpit of California my whole life. So
Right. Well, do you know what? That's why I thought you were in California, because in my head I was like Fresno, and I'm like, no, it's just like somehow I crossed the wires. If your name is Fresca, and I was like, it's a bit like Fresno, and I was like, you must be from California. Somehow all
that's
that was happening behind the scenes that
no,
made me
you're
think
not.
you're from California, and I'm like, that's just because you somehow are thinking Fresno, which is like obscure, a small town in the middle of
No.
nowhere anyway. It's
I'm
pretty
laughing
funny.
because you're not far off at all. That's exactly why my father named me Fresca because
That's so
so
funny.
Filipinos, they like to make up their children's names for some
Okay.
reason. And so I was born in Fresno, California. And so that's why my name is Fresca. So he took the NO off Fresno and basically replaced it with CA. So I'm
Wow.
Fresca because I was born in Fresno, California. So it's so funny that you kind of thought about that.
You know what that is? That's my Bethel prophetic gifting. That's what that is.
Oh, okay. How long were you there?
4 years. I was there a while.
Okay.
I was pretty in deep. So yeah, I definitely,
Wow.
yeah, was there for sure.
Because
It's yeah.
I
Go
have
for
a
it.
best friend. I have a best friend that is still trying to get into their I don't know what to call it, like magic school.
School of Supernatural Witchcraft and Wizardry. Yeah.
No, really, what did they call it? Did they call it like supernatural school or
It's
something?
the Bethel School of Supernatural Ministry. Yeah. It's of
Wow.
If you were to pick a Bible school that was Hogwarts, it's definitely as close as you're going to get. Like it's like all
Wow.
out. They are like definitely. Thing is though, I don't know. Like they don't do that much supernatural stuff in the school. They do, but that's not a focus at all, which really surprised me because
Hmm.
when I went there, I was like, I want to see some shit, right? I want to see people
Yeah.
healed and do it. And you do kind of see all kinds of amazing, crazy, weird stuff, like for sure, like constantly. I have like such a weird long list of like crazy stuff that I'm like, I don't even know what to do with that. I'll just put that to the side. Let's keep going.
I've
But
seen videos.
yeah, I mean, it's crazy. There's always something crazy going on. Um, but yeah, like I mean, they do a lot of stuff on leadership and relationships and how to like, connect with people and lots of pretty good life skills, to be honest with you. Most
Yeah,
of the
yeah.
ways I've become a fairly rounded person, I can thank Bethel for most of it. And
Oh, yeah.
so, I'm like, pretty cool school, actually. I would, if you were like well into charismatic Christianity and you were still quite conventional in your faith, I'd be like, yeah, go to Bethel. It's probably going to be good for you. I mean, if you're going to be in that world, Bethel's as good as place as any. I mean, you're probably going to have to be like kind of full on alt-right politically, and you're going to have to be whatever. But I'm like, you're probably all those things anyway. So
Yeah.
sure, go to
Mhm.
Bethel. That's fine. But I think anyone that's on the path of deconstruction, I've had people that are like, oh, should I go to Bethel? And I'm like, are you
No.
smoking? No, do not do that. Don't. But that's like saying, should I, go to Southern Baptist, church? It's like probably not if you're deconstructing.
No.
This is just not like a really kind of the right place. So yeah,
Uh,
that's funny. So your friend's trying to get in.
Yeah, she's trying to move her family there. And
Wow.
I haven't
That's
told her,
wild.
actually, I haven't told her about my deconstruction story, but
Okay.
it's funny because I grew up with Christians my whole life. So yeah, I'm still very heavily involved and know people who are still very much very
Yeah.
evangelical, very Christian. And so I don't know. It's interesting. I'm slowly starting to tell my friends. And I think that the people that mean the most to me are the friends that have known me when I was like super Christian and on fire for Jesus and read my Bible. Like, I feel like those are the people that I feel the most kind of insecure about telling because they knew me as someone else. So sharing with them how much I've changed is yeah, it's going to be a little weird and awkward. And they're going to be like, I don't know who you are anymore. And I'll be like, yeah, I don't know either.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
That's a hard thing to do. It's the same dynamic when you go back to be with your family after living away and you come back and you almost regress internally yourself because there's something weird about being so different from who you used to be. And they know the worst side of you, the most regressive side of you, the whatever side that is like, hi, family, me. It's a weird dynamic going back to where you came from. And I feel like there's some weird dynamic as well of like, there's a greater fear of rejection on some level, or I don't know what it is, but like, it's
Absolutely.
like, they really know me. If they're rejecting me, they're really rejecting me.
Yeah.
Which is quite funny because probably actually it's like much less that they're rejecting us because they don't know us at all in some ways anymore, right? Because there's some distance between those two potentially.
Sure,
but yeah,
sure.
it's a weird one. Wow. So
Yeah,
are
well,
we gonna
yeah,
have to
compared to
undercover this
uh-huh.
podcast? We're gonna have to like use a pseudonym or
Oh,
something. I'll
no,
cut the
no, no.
bit where we talked about Fresco.
No, it's actually fine. I don't know. I've already so on this even in the beginning of this whole journey when I started this Instagram and when I started this podcast, I already felt, well, I mean, to put it bluntly, I've already been kind of like the black sheep of the family, kind of like shunned put to the side of my family already for a few years now. So it's not like, no, I haven't exactly told all of my family. I definitely haven't told my pastor dad.
Right.
But then even with him, I wasn't talking to him I didn't talk to him for like 3 years. And then
Wow.
it wasn't until I had my second child that he started talking to me again. And so we're civil. We're like acquaintances. I don't know. I call him on Christmas. So it's kind of that relationship. So I'm not around. I don't know. It's fine. I don't know how that conversation would be like. And I think it would be really scary if I did tell my dad my deconstruction journey. Absolutely. I think I would die, but I don't know. But I don't know. He's not in my life. So I don't know.
Yeah. It's a weird one with pastors as well. I think anyone, like, when considering telling their parents, they're going through that process of going like, okay, what would they be like? How will they respond? And that's hard, right? 'Cause it's family. We love them. Like, even in estranged and complex situations, there's some sort of bond there where you're like, I don't want them to hate me or for it to blow up. But there's a weird component when your parents are pastors that it's like, you've probably seen how they talk about people that walk away. How they talk about someone that says, oh, I'm not so sure about my belief. Like, we've been behind the scenes where they come back from that meeting and they're sitting around the dinner table and they're like, well, Bob, he just never really believed. I always said like whatever, or, you know, or whatever it is, yes. Right? The different ways. And so on some level, we really know what that looks like potentially. And maybe it is different. Maybe, right, it's it's like daughter, like, I gotta, like, you know, maybe, I don't know, some people maybe surprise us, but on some level it feels like I kind of know this conversation because I've witnessed this conversation when other people have done it.
Yeah, there's so many things I can say about that, but I guess I don't feel like I'm doing anything like courageous or brave because I've already been shunned from my family. So I say that because I feel like for people who are deconstructing and they're still living in their parents' house maybe, and they're still very involved with their family, like they need their family either financially or maybe they need their family because the in-laws like watch their children or whatever. They're like very invested in their families. I feel like those people who deconstruct, they are the courageous ones. They're the ones that are really brave. And I can't imagine going through that if I was still involved with my family. Like that is hard. So yeah, I commend those people a lot.
For real. I talk to those people daily. People are like, hi, I live with my parents. Yes. What should I do? And I'm like, dude, start saving, get out as soon as possible. But I get that's going to be 3 years. So in the meantime, like, here's some lists of things you could do, but dang, that is going to suck. And talked to one girl a couple of weeks ago, and she's financially, like, she has only ever worked as part of her parents' company as well. And like, it's just like, you're so in, right? So your finances are there. You could lose your job. So you might not just get kicked out of the house. You might actually lose your job as well. So now I'm kicked out of the house and I've lost my job. That's a bad combo, right? I can maybe do one of those two things, but both at the same time is like no go. And so you're left really going, hard. I guess I lie to everyone I know and don't ever let anyone see the real me. And it's like, oh, kill me like that. That's a horrible thing to have to live with. So you're right. Those people are just my heroes. They really are.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I definitely did that though, like survive throughout high school and college, but in different reasons, not because I didn't want to be a Christian anymore, but just because of the way my parents raised me, in like very legalistic, fundamentalist. And so not only being very religious, but also being strict Asian parents. I tell people I feel like I got a double whammy by having very strict Asian parents, but also very strict religious parents growing up. Right. So
yeah. What kind of denomination were they from? What was the background?
So it was Southern Baptist, actually.
Okay, perfect. So, yeah, there we go.
Yeah. It's interesting because I'm a second or third generation Southern Baptist. Wow. Southern Baptist missionaries went to the Philippines, of course, and converted some Filipinos from Catholicism to being Southern Baptist, I guess. And it's interesting because on my mother and my father both grew up in Southern Baptist churches. And actually my mom, my grandpa was actually a Southern Baptist pastor, and they were actually part of the convention. So I think I remember telling you this when we did another live together, but yeah, the Samaritan Purse organization, the shoe boxes, the Operation Christmas Child shoe boxes actually get sent to the churches in the Philippines where my aunts and my cousins still attend. So it's interesting that I've been involved in the convention for my whole life, and my parents have been as well. And so naturally, when my parents decided to come to America, my dad was ordained within the Southern Baptist Convention. And then that's when he started church planting Filipino churches within the Central Valley of California. So,
yeah.
Wow. So I grew up. Yeah. So for the first 10 years, from like all through the 90s, my dad was a Filipino church planter, and he would work with other Southern Baptist churches, and we would be like the Filipino ministry of this like predominantly white congregation. Like they would give us like a space or like the fellowship hall to meet, so we worked with a lot of these white evangelical churches. So like, I had, so we would wake up every Sunday morning, like an hour earlier, and we would drive an hour to another rural town. And my dad's van was basically like so when you're like a traveling pastor, you bring your church with you everywhere you go. So our van had like hymn books, music stands, microphones, and do you hear that?
Yeah. Do you want we can pause sure. if you want to go.
Okay, one second. Okay, sorry about that.
Okay. No worries. So you were talking about your dad's van being like this church on the go, like pop-up church kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So when you're a traveling pastor or a traveling preacher, you bring your church building with you in your van. So we had like hymn books and music stands and microphones and bulletins and Sunday school curriculum, like everything that you would need for a church would be in our van. So that's what we would do. My brother and I would go with our father and my mom. We would travel an hour away to this town. On Sunday morning, we would set up the sanctuary. I would pass out all the hymn books on the chairs. I would fold bulletins, and then my dad would have the service. He would preach, and my brother would be the pianist, and my mom would be the Sunday school teacher. And sometimes I would just be like, in the beginning of those years, because I was like 5 or 6 when we started doing this. I was just like the little girl running up and down the aisles. But yeah, later on, of course, my father put me to work, and later on, I learned how to play piano too, which I wasn't a big fan of. But it was mostly my brother that was the all-star pianist, and but yeah, and we would go to different towns doing that. We would actually go to like Bakersfield and Visalia and other rural towns. And then so in the evening, on Sunday evenings, we would come back to our hometown, and then we would have house church. And so we would set up our house with all the chairs and bulletins and hymn books, and we would have house church. And so we would have church in the morning and church in the evening. So it was pretty busy growing up.
That's full on. And it's full on that life of like, you get up extra early to travel, and then it's a whole another early because you're setting everything up. And then you're there right at the end because you got to tear it all down and get everything back in a van. And then you got to travel home. By the time you've done that, it's like we have like time for a really late lunch. And then we're basically starting again from scratch for evening service. I always thought this when you were part of churches that were like morning, evening service, it was like, there's no time off in this day. Like I need like several hours to unwind. I can't unwind in like 30 minutes or something. And you just didn't ever have that window on a Sunday. Like it was just endless. It just felt like it just constantly went. But that's full on. So like, did you enjoy that as a kid? Like, did you grow up like, I mean, there's something about growing up in a bubble where you don't know any different in a lot of ways. Like, did you
did
you envy other people? Like, did you go to a secular school or anything, or were you homeschooled or Christian school?
So I went to public school, so I definitely knew the difference between the Christian world and the secular world.
Right.
And
your friends weren't getting up at like 8 a.m. to go set up a church like 2 hours away or anything. No,
I felt really, I mean, I didn't understand the lifestyle that my parents were doing until I was like in middle school, and I was like, oh, okay, like this is what we do, and other people don't do this. And then I started comparing. So my father was a church planter, and he would start up churches, Filipino churches, but most of the congregations were really small. And it was his purpose was to gather other Filipino immigrants that came to America and just like to have a community for them. And I think growing up, I wish that I actually went to a mega church where there was like a lot of resources, where there was like children's church and like a choir, and they had like plays and all these big productions. I think that's what I wished, the kind of church I went to growing up. But eventually my dad stopped doing that, and we ended up just joining one of our mother churches in Fresno. And then from junior high to high school and college, that's the church that I attended. And the church knew us, and they worked with us, and they loved my parents, and they loved my brother and I. And it was like diverse, but mostly like predominantly white. But yeah, I was really loved there. And it was a small country church, like 200 people in the middle of grapevines in Fresno. And growing up, I really did feel loved. Like I did feel like all the little old ladies would give me a hug and tell me like I did a good job if I sang special music or whatever, and which I did pretty often. And it's funny when you're serving at a small church, because if you're the only person that knows how to decently sing or play guitar, they think you're like amazing. You are
a superstar in your little like kind of like little bubble. You are like, oh my God, someone plays a musical instrument. Yes, this is so much better than no musical instrument. But yeah, it's really funny, isn't it? And then, there's definitely that. I remember when I was at Bethel, actually, it's funny because you'd see all these people want to audition to be in the worship band for the school or whatever. But it's so funny, right? Because like, I mean, Bethel is like, they're known for their music, like
Yeah,
massively.
absolutely.
And like their standards are like through the roof, and they're not just musical. There's a lot of other boxes to tick there. But we don't talk about that. But what's funny is that you would have like 400 people showing up for like 20 spots. And it was so funny because you'd see these people that were like, oh, I'm a rock star back home, you know, because they could play guitar and they could sing, but they show up on a stage and they're singing next to people that are actual rock stars. You know what I mean? It's just like, oh, this is painful to watch the difference between these two. And you go, oh, this is what happens when you grow up in a little bubble. I'm not saying you were a terrible singer, but
no,
you were pretty
that's
bad. No, I'm joking.
I'm decent. I'm not like, yeah, I'm like, okay. I'm a choir voice. I have a choir voice, but no, I'm laughing because that's exactly what happened to me. Actually, when I got married, I moved to Bakersfield, and that's when I started going to mega churches for the first time in my life. And I did audition for the worship team. And then that's when I realized I was like, I mean, I knew I wasn't like that, like the greatest, but I did think I was like decent. Like I could play all the C, D, F, you know,
right. You
E
knew
chords.
The, like, four or five chords required.
That's all you need to know, right? And so I remember auditioning for them, and I was like freaking out because, yeah, it was a huge mega church. Like, there was like 700 people. Not that 700 people were watching me audition, but just like being on that stage. I've never been involved with a church that had like all this production, all these lights and monitors and everything. And then I was freaking out, and I was like, okay, I can't really do this. I'm so really am that little pastor's kid from a small country church in the middle of nowhere, where I was like loved and people knew me my whole entire life. And now I'm going out to like mega churches and I have like no idea how it's like.
That's so funny. I feel like I was the exact opposite experience as being a pastor kid. We were like really small churches. My parents always ended up being pastors of these tiny churches. And this is in the UK tiny. So UK tiny church, 10 people. UK mega church, anything over like 200 is a mega church. Really good church doing really well. 60 people plus is a great church right now. So like totally different environment. And I'm part of small churches, right? So the biggest church my dad was ever like a pastor of was probably like 50 people. And I remember distinctly being very conscious of how shit I was at everything. There was nothing I was good at. Like the best thing I was good at as a teenager was maybe sitting online and watching porn. That was basically it. And there wasn't a big market for that in the church, believe it or not, right? No one was looking for that skill set. I was a pretty dysfunctional kid. I wasn't good at anything. And what's funny is they taught me, like, I got music lessons for keyboard, playing the keyboard and learning the piano. And at some point I got okay. And I'm meaning like slowly pressing like individual keys in the right order, that kind of okay. I know I'm not good. I know I'm not Coldplay or anything good, right? No one's giving me that impression. And yet no one in our church plays any musical instruments. And suddenly all eyes turn to Phil and they're like, Phil could play worship songs just, you know, as we sing along. And I'm just like, oh God, what's happened? Like that was terrifying to me. I never actually had to do any of that, but there was moments where I was like, I feel like I'm being primed here. I think I almost self-sabotaged to avoid that scenario.
I think the church is looking for anyone that can serve in any capacity. Like, oh, you're good in public speaking, you should teach Sunday school. Like well,
especially those environments, like what you're talking about there, right? Small environment, not many people.
That's true.
The pastor, the pastor's wife, the pastor's son, the pastor's daughter. We're like a 4-person team. There's no staff. Like the pastor's not even getting paid right now. Like we are just trying to get this thing running off the ground. If anyone can do any of this well, please write up the bulletin for us and print it off, or you please go and, I don't know, put out chairs. Like we'll take any help we can get. That's very much the small church vibe. And I think a lot of that gets missed in a lot of conversations about deconstruction. I think the kind of mega church scene kind of takes over, and it's easy to point fingers at that and go, disgusting, a lot of it. But I think we miss the kind of like rural mom and pop, just genuinely trying to help people, right? Create community for these kind of amazing Filipino people that are wanting to gather around their faith and around their common, like, background and all this different stuff. Like that's a really great thing to be trying to provide. And yet it's hard to do on your own, right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
Tough. So if I can draft my kids in, probably gonna end up doing it, right?
Yeah, so church ministry is really, really hard. And I think that yeah, it was really discouraging because yeah, a lot of people wouldn't show up, and sometimes people wouldn't show up for a service. And like sometimes some years were really good where we had a lot of people, and some years we didn't have a lot of people. And so I think there was, and then eventually there was a church split at one point where there was a lot of disagreements. And but I think feeling discouraged in ministry is something that I'm very familiar with. And I just like, oh, I don't want to be a pastor's wife. Like, even though my parents groomed me to be a pastor's wife someday. And they're like, no, you know how to do this in the church. And I have to, so I learned, so basically I'm like, I know how to do church, or I know like the evangelical way and the Baptist way of doing church. I know how you're supposed to dress, how you're supposed to talk, how you're supposed to greet people, how you're supposed to be a good pastor's wife. And sometimes I catch myself when I'm looking at other pastors' wives and I'm like, they're not very friendly. And they didn't ask me like,
I could do your job better than you.
Yeah. Like they talked about themselves too much. Like if I'm new in that church, they should have asked me more questions about myself and where I'm from and why I'm, like that's I catch funny. Myself like I can't help but like keep critiquing pastors' wives or like churches in general whenever I walk into a church. But which is interesting because I'm actually still going to church with my husband, and he's still a Christian and I'm not. And I guess that would be like my struggle. The biggest struggle in my deconstruction story is not necessarily I have to tell my whole family, but I had to tell my husband, who is still a Christian. And yeah, we were both Christians when we met. And when we were dating, I agreed that we would raise our children in church. Yeah, like absolutely. I totally wanted to do that. 1 second. You can edit all this out, right?
Yeah, you're fine. You're fine. It's not a problem.
So yeah.
So you're saying about your husband, and yeah, you got together and you're both Christian and agreed to raise your kids Christian. There's this, no one gets married as Christians and almost even thinks about this, right? On some level, like when you're Christian, you're just like, well, yeah, obviously, like, yeah, I don't know. It feels like an ambush in a sense when one of you turns around and goes, hey, I'm not so sure about all this suddenly. Like, yeah, I don't know. It's a big deal, right? I mean, it's.
Yeah. So I know that I agreed to raise our children in church when even when we were like dating, getting to know each other. So, so I want to still honor that, even though I'm not a Christian anymore. And like everyone's deconstruction story is going to be different. And everyone who is in a similar situation like me, where their spouse doesn't want to be a Christian anymore, like they're all different. But for me, I still feel like, like we both currently want to still work things out and and compromise, and it doesn't matter if one of us is a Christian and the other one still is a Christian. Like there's always going to be, in any marriage that you're in, there's going to be issues, and there's going to be things in marriage that you have to compromise on. So I feel like this is just one of those things that in our marriage that we have to learn how to compromise on. And I told my husband, the first time I told my husband that I didn't want to be a Christian anymore was actually last summer, when all this stuff was happening, and how the evangelical church was not responding appropriately at all. But even then, before that, I've been on this journey for a few years now, even before I even knew the term deconstruction. Like I was deconstructing before I knew of the term, like most people, and so, and yeah, I was really scared when I decided to tell him that I didn't want to be a Christian anymore. And I think I just had to surrender my marriage, not necessarily to God, but just like I wanted to tell him, and if he wanted to leave me, then I needed to like honor that. And because I'm honoring myself by being my true authentic self. And so I needed, if he wanted to leave me, then I needed to honor that. And so that's how I got to the point where I was like, okay, I have to tell him. And I was super scared, but I told him, and that was last summer. So far we're still together, but, and it's like, because when you get in, especially when you grow up in the church, you're taught that divorce is wrong and you have to do everything you can to make things work. And I feel like whenever I think about marriage in such a rigid way, I think that's what causes divorce, when you like hold your marriage so tightly. But I feel like when I hold my marriage, like not necessarily loosely, but just like open, like I'm open to our relationship changing. I'm open to these outcomes. And in a weird way, it's like, because I'm like being so open in the marriage, I feel like I'm actually making it better by not like holding on to it so tight and like being so rigid in all these rules and everything. But yeah, and it takes two people to compromise, right? It takes two people to be in a marriage. And so far we have been willing to communicate and talk with each other about these things. And I think that one of the biggest things that has given both of us perspectives during my deconstruction journey is, how did we both grow up in the church? Because for me, as a pastor's kid, I grew up always serving in church and not really receiving, as opposed to my husband, who he didn't have any parents who were like in pastoral ministry or anything like that. He grew up, his mom was a single mom, and he didn't have his dad around, and the church loves those situations, right? They just like count on them, like, come on in, we'll take care of you, and he was one of those kids that always needed like a scholarship to go to like summer camp or conferences and stuff. And so he was on the receiving end of ministry, where they brought him in, they took care of him and just loved on him. And so when we understood how each other grew up in church, that's when he was able to understand where I'm coming from. And also he realized that I didn't get to choose this religion. Like I didn't get to choose this path. And so I'm happy that he's able to give me this space to figure things out. And also he said to me early on that he told me, I don't want you to believe in Jesus for me. I want you to believe in Jesus for yourself. And I think that after he said that, that gave me a little bit more hope for our marriage and just our relationship in general, that like, okay, we can communicate, we can compromise, we can try to understand where the other person is coming from. And it's been an interesting journey. And like I said, I still go to church with my husband, but we've, since COVID, we've only gone like 3 times.
Right.
And
definitely makes it easier.
It was out of all the things that happened last year, at least not going to church was a good thing. But anyway, so I did go to church the last 2 Sundays with him, and I told him that I was like, I had to tell him after the second service that I was like, I don't think I'm comfortable going to the worship part of the service where they're singing songs. Like I don't think I'm comfortable with that part, but I'll join you in the sermon part. So I actually like the sermon part, because then I can take notes and
great material for all your posts throughout the week, right?
Yeah. Like I can write down my notes and what I think, what I disagree with, and how they took the Bible verse out of context or whatever. And so I actually think that's kind of fun. Like I'm totally fine listening to the sermon, but listening to the praise and worship time, like, I did that 2 Sundays in a row, and I was like, I think I want to throw up.
That's so funny. I'm similar as well. I've even when I was a Christian, I was like, I just don't like Christian worship and the worship time. I just did not enjoy it. And And now I'm like, I could go back in church. Like, that's fine. Like, I can rock it. Like, I don't have like any major trauma with trigger points or anything, but put me in the church worship. I'm like, oh, I'm going to go hide in the bathroom for 40 minutes and just not come back. And I'll wait till it quiets down and I'll come out. I would rather you think I had horrible diarrhea for 40 minutes than have to sit in this service during this portion. I will even do the welcome bit where you talk to your neighbor and say hi. And like, I will do that over the worship bit. The worship bit is definitely the worst part for me. I don't know what that is. That it's quite common for a lot of people. There's something really intense and triggering about it.
For me,
what is that for you?
So for me, it's because I used to rely on this higher power for my worth and my value, right? Like when you're praising worship, when you're singing songs to God, you're like, I need you, you know, I'm nothing without you. You fill the void in my life. Like I've been so far away from church, I can't even remember any lyrics, but basically that's like the gist of it, right? Like, like we're nothing without you, Lord. And it's so like external. It's so degrading yourself and looking externally. And in my deconstruction journey and in my exploration of other kinds of spirituality, I've learned to look within, to look internally within myself. So I think that's what triggers me the most is like all these people are like worshiping God and degrading themselves and seeking this higher power like outside of them, when I'm just like, no, you can seek it within. Like you can be empowered. You can find that strength and that power within yourself. Like you don't have to find that outside yourself. And so that's why it's really triggering for me. Like the entire philosophy or spirituality is just so twisted for me in my brain. That's why I can't listen to most worship music. But no, it's interesting because there is a new Christian musical that came out on Netflix called A Week Away. Have you heard of it?
I saw someone mention it. I don't know if it's on the UK Netflix or not. I've not come across it. What's it called? A Week Away?
It's called A Week Away. It's about Christian summer camp, basically. But what's interesting about the musical is that they use Christian contemporary music, CCM songs from the 90s.
Oh, wow.
So there's Michael W. Smith songs, Stephen Curtis Chapman, Amy Grant, and audio adrenaline. And it's like, it was just like when I didn't know anything about it really when I watched it, but when I started watching it and like all these familiar songs came up, I was just like, okay, like this hits totally different because it brings so much nostalgia. It brought like good memories, bad memories.
That's so interesting.
And yeah, it just like, hit me in my core. Like it was just supposed to be a cheesy, silly Christian musical, whatever.
Right.
But then it was like bringing all this like deep, dark nostalgia that I haven't even thought about in years. Just like all these songs like coming out, and I was just like, and then I was like crying, and I didn't even know why I was crying. It was like so silly. Actually, I did a review of it on my podcast, and I explained why I'm crying and everything, because I didn't know why I was crying, but I was crying because it was like the musical was showing the good parts, the fun parts of Christianity, like summer camp and like war games, making fun of each other and all this stuff. But then I realized like, oh, it's not really like that. It's not really like I used to think it was like that. I used to think this was the best way to live my life. But now I don't think it is. And I think I was just realizing that loss of innocence, like, and realizing how much like, and like I was grieving in a way, like, like I can't believe like this silly Christian musical was making me cry and grieve and feel all these feelings. So I felt kind of like weird feeling that way, but it was, that musical like really hit me in a different way. And I feel like it would if you grew up on Christian contemporary music. But what I really wanted to say was with Christian contemporary music, like there's a big difference between CCM and Hillsong. With Hillsong, you're singing about Jesus like every 2 seconds. You're like saying his name, you're saying Jesus, you're saying God, you're like, oh my gosh, all these spiritual things. But I feel like I could actually listen to some Christian contemporary music because they don't mention God or Jesus. Like they don't it's like, I don't know, a trend in the 90s and early 2000s to like not mention God or Jesus, but like, you know, they're talking about it like Mercy Me's like I can only imagine. And I actually had a friend who wasn't Christian. She heard that song and she thought it was a love story. And so a lot of the CCM songs, they sound like love songs, right? Just to people.
Oh, you could
and
easy play a game like of like, is this a 90s like boy band love song? Is this Backstreet Boys, or is this the, I don't know who's a good, I'm not
the
into
Christian
music,
version,
I don't know, the Newsboys
versus...
or I don't know, like
I would say it
pick,
was
but
yeah, there's definitely the equivalent, like the equivalent Backstreet Boys, the equivalent of like the Christian version and the secular version of the music. And I think that's why they did that way, to attract, you know, people into learning more about God, was so that they don't say God and Jesus and they make it like really vague. But Christians know that they are talking about God, but a non-Christian wouldn't know.
Can we note as well, it's so funny, like, but no one has ever done the Christian version of whatever the secular version is, and it's better. Literally, no one in the history of the world has gone, oh, let's try and be the Christian Backstreet Boys. Let's try and be the Christian Coldplay. Let's try and be the Christian whatever. Never have they been good enough to then people go, oh, that's actually really good, other than Christians, right? Christians go, oh, it's not bad. For a Christian thing, that's not too bad. But never is a Christian movie, Christian music ever like been like, this is the best thing ever. Non-Christians aren't going, how do we buy your CD? How do we get this movie? Like A Week Away, I guarantee is not going to be beating out Hamilton for views. You know, like,
no, absolutely not.
It's so funny. Like, I don't know. It cracks me up. Like the way we like, I say we, I mean, I don't
Christians,
remember.
like
we
evangelicals
imitate
try
this
to...
thing, but it's so bad. It's just so bad. Like
it is.
Me and my wife have a thing where like, well, I think it's me and I just drag my wife into it, but I'm like, babe, there's a Sharknado 6. We've got to watch Sharknado 6. Even if we haven't seen all the Sharknados, you know that number 6, I mean, Sharknado is going to be bad. That's going to be really bad. They made a premise of sharks getting caught in a tornado, going into New York in the tornado and eating people on the streets. That's ridiculous. Then they made 5 more movies. The 6th movie is going to be ridiculous. Like, I mean, the first one was bad, but 6 is going to be bad. I put all Christian movies in the same category. Like, I'm like, babe, we got to watch God's Not Dead. Come on, right? So they think, right? Some kid goes to high school, goes to college, and there's a lecturer who's proving God doesn't exist, and he is gonna save the. I'm like, this is it. I'm here for this like D movie craziness. Like that if this was a regular movie that didn't have a Christian audience buying it, would be immediately like, wouldn't even get on TV. This would be like straight to VHS, like bought at like backstreet markets. You know, it's so bad. Like Christian stuff is so bad, it pains me. I don't know. I'm going on a rant, but it's so bad.
No,
it's good. Like, you're mentioning A Week Away. Was it A Week Away? Is that what it's called?
That's what it's called.
Watch it. That to me, whether it's good or bad, I'm immediately like, I'm in a Christian musical. I am so in for that because it's only getting better by being worse for me. I relish like how bad it's going to be. I look forward to pausing it every couple of minutes and saying to my wife, like, what is this? What? How did that happen? How is that? What are the lines? Whatever it is, I love how bad it is.
I want to see your what you think about it. I want to see your own review on it.
I need to do a review.
Okay.
I'm hoping it's on the UK Netflix. I don't know if because we're less Christian-y as a nation, I just think like you do get way more Christian stuff. This is how into bad Christian media I am. Okay. I would literally sign up for PureFlix if they had that in the UK. It's not available. Do you know what PureFlix is?
Yeah, I've heard of it. I've seen some ads.
That's actually a thing. And in America, there is actually a big enough audience that people are going to pay whatever, like $9 a month to just watch bad Christian movies. And I judge them from afar. And then I actually go, I kind of like to do that too, because it would be so funny. So yeah, I don't know. It's just a whole world. I cannot believe. But you're hitting on something really huge there, though. Talking about your experience watching that, like, I think we can be so black and white when we look back, and it's very easy when we've grown up and we've evolved and developed, and we look back and go, that's so unhealthy, that's so unhelpful, there's so much toxicity in that. But it's not so black and white. It isn't all toxic and it isn't all bad. That's a very childish approach to just write off an entire like no one can be wrong all the time. Like that's impossible. No one's smart enough to come up with something that's absolutely wrong all the time. And there's something about the fact that there's so much good that we lost in some ways. These communities, these connections, the friendships, even some of the things we learned. Toxic Christianity in the midst of it all taught me how to connect with people better than honestly a lot of things in school. I wasn't getting any healthy relationship teachings and how to connect with people, how to make friends with people at different ages that I would never cross paths with normally, and lots of different things. I learned to do public speaking in church, like there's different skills and things. And so it's kind of hard, but I think these kind of moments that kind of throw it in your face and you suddenly realize, this thing that I've kind of drawn a line in the sand and gone, that was just bad and I want to move on and I want to be done with it. I don't want to overly go there. But when you see something and it kind of puts it in your face and goes, hey, but look at these good parts that you kind of miss on some level, and you haven't really allowed yourself to grieve because you're not even acknowledging it. And suddenly I have to grieve this. I have to grieve that some of this was fun. Summer camp was fun. Yeah, it was toxic as hell. Go watch Yes, God, Yes to find out some of the weirdness of summer camp, right? Absolutely, that's unhealthy. But you know what? Kind of fun. A lot of it was kind of fun. I liked sitting around fires and chatting and feeling like you got to know these people and feeling part of something that you don't really feel like as a teenager growing up a lot of the time, or whatever that is. Like that is it. I can totally see like getting hit with that and going, oh, this is affecting me emotionally, and I feel like I'm grieving and upset and nostalgic, and yet I kind of also hate this. And I'm like, I don't know what to do with that kind of combo. But I think that's a really common thing for us to go through. And I think it's a bit, it's very disorientating, I think, in a lot of ways.
It was. Yeah. So that's why I had to do an episode just talking about the movie, because I had like so many different emotions, so many conflicting emotions. I was like, I don't know what to do with this. I need to talk about this somewhere. I need to put this somewhere. So yeah, because like someone that like didn't grow up on that music or didn't grow up in the Christian church, they'll just pass it off as just like, okay, that's just another silly, cheesy musical or whatever. But someone like me that actually knew the songs and grew up in that environment, it's just going to hit completely different.
Big time. Yeah. There's so much media right now, like that has undertones of deconstruction within it. Like just regular, you've got like Yes, God, Yes. You've got there's
the gemstones. Have you heard of
gemstones?
The Righteous Gemstones?
Absolutely. Amazing. Oh my gosh. Good.
Yeah.
But like
so
you watch it and you're like, okay, I don't know how big a deal your dad got, but my dad, not in that world, right? We were poor as hell. Like we redefined poor for our community. Poor people gave us their secondhand clothes. Like so we weren't the Righteous Gemstones. We didn't have jets. We didn't have our own theme park. But you watch it and you're like, yeah, but some of this shit, this is just crazy. And yeah, I've experienced this and
going
seen
on
it
right now in America.
And absolutely, right? You can see it all over America. It's crazy. But yeah, there's so much going on. And I think it is tapping into the fact that this is happening in America. People are unraveling their faith. There was a TV show, what was it? The Bounty Hunters. What was it? Teenage Bounty Hunters. Did you watch that?
No, I didn't.
It's a good fun show.
Okay.
But they're part of this like kind of Christian private school. They're good Christian kids. They're talking about purity culture, but they're also like, this is bullshit. We don't give a crap. And we want to go like, I'm gonna give my boyfriend a blowjob, or and then it's things of like, oh God, what does that do? And people find out and we talk about this. And you're like, this is an entirely secular show that has a huge theme right through it of deconstruction. And I'm seeing it again and again and again in different popular latest media things. I think
yeah,
it's
like
a conversation that people
too.
want to have. Yeah,
the singer Lil Nas,
right? Huge
in his latest music video. Yeah.
And I think this is why we're seeing Christians starting to go, oh crap, we have to acknowledge this. We have to try and co-opt it. We have to try and control the narrative around it. We have to redefine it. But generally speaking, that only happens once it's kind of way too late anyway, if they can ever do any of those things.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's mainstream at this point. Everyone has kind of noticed that the church is shrinking fast. There's massive amounts of people leaving. People are having these conversations in very public ways, accounts like yours, podcasts, the conversation is happening. And it's really interesting to see how media will facilitate that, and also what Christian media is going to come out to try and fix it. And I cannot wait. I am there for every one of them.
I have no idea what they're going to come up with, but I feel like God's not dead. They covered the atheist part. They covered the typical atheist professor. And so I felt really like, ooh, that was really cringy, but
it's so painful. It's like just all straw dog, right? It's like, oh, well, this is an atheist, and we can quickly dismantle this in one episode, one movie, and clearly any atheist that watches this is now going to get saved.
It's going to be changed.
Did that ever happen? I want to do like a poll of all like America and go, did any atheist get saved? And I want that person to come on my podcast. I so want to know that person and talk through how God's not dead saved them. Like, it's just fascinating.
I mean, have you ever thought about why are there atheists that become Christians, and why are there Christians that become atheists? Have you had your own philosophical idea on why that happens?
I have thought they're less philosophical and more psychological, I think. Because I do think there's stages. So generally speaking, people that are Christian in America, in the UK, they're generally at a conventional stage of psychological development. So as we grow, we go through these stages of developing. You'll notice with kids, young kids, in fact, what age was your daughter? 5, do you say?
5.
Yeah. So
I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old.
Oh my God. Right. Perfect. So your 2-year-old is almost certainly at a stage that's often known as quite magical, and is about to start transitioning, and maybe already has started transitioning into a stage called power or control or ego.
Yes.
And so she's starting to realize that, you know what, the world isn't kind of magical and provides all my needs for me all the time. It kind of does, sort of. And this is quite magical. When I yell, Mom, I want food, food shows up, and it's kind of amazing. But sometimes I don't get food, and I'm angry about it because I want to be in control. I want to get what I want. I'm a person. I start to realize, hey, sometimes the food Mom brings, it's total horseshit. And I'm done with that. I don't want that food. I want this food, right? And so it's a stage of development where you start to want your own things. You develop your own ego, and it's all about power and control. And that's a really healthy thing to grow into and develop. We really want our toddlers to learn what their identity, who they are, what they like, what they don't like. But it is a pain in the ass, right? I mean, no one wants to actually have to put up with that for a few years, which is kind of what you have to do. But long term, you can't stay there, right? If you stay at that stage and get to like 30, you're just a narcissistic asshole at that point, right? That's not a healthy thing to do. But some people do kind of stay largely at that stage and generally they end up in prison. They end up ending up with all sorts of addictions, and they end up being violent, and they have all sorts of, they basically are toddlers as adults in a lot of ways, right? And it gets them in a lot of problems. And the next stage beyond that, which your 5-year-old's probably starting to move into, is called conventional. And it's a stage that most adults kind of hang around at as well. And it's a stage where you start to go, you know what, me yelling and screaming and getting my own way works sometimes, but most of the time people just get pissed off with me and hate me, and before long I get stuck in a room on my own, or something happens, or if you're an adult, I end up in prison, or I end up as my dictator, I end up beheaded, and there's a new dictator who takes my place. So before long they start to go, what if I just accept that there are rules and structure, and I try and play along, and I try and take part, and if I do, we all win, and it all is kind of safe and certain and secure, and we can look to maybe a few people that are in charge and just trust that they know what's best, and they'll tell us what's right and what's wrong. This is generally speaking the next stage of childhood and development for humans. And most humans are looking for that in their faith. Most humans are looking for that in their society. They just want to feel certain, safe, secure. They want some leaders, a president, a pastor, a God to go, this is the way you live your life. You do that, you'll be okay, right, wrong. And I think generally speaking, the types of people that shift into Christianity that come from an atheistic place are usually out of places that are really unstable, usually still a person that's been heavily in that egotistical power, control, very unstable homes, usually in homes that have a lot of addiction, instability. They've never really felt in control themselves and have tried to fight for control their whole life and never found it. And suddenly they find this community that gives them safety, certainty, security, can tell them what's right, what's wrong, provide for them. You mentioned your husband maybe coming from an environment where his single mom feels very unsafe a lot of the time, and suddenly church provides all that for him. It's great. And so whether you grew up Christian or not, you suddenly are like, Christianity is very attractive and it fills all these needs. It's a positive, helpful development and growth. You could do that growth without Christianity as well as other ways. Go look at anywhere else in the world. People grow through that stage and find those things in many other faiths or no faith and communities and local things. But I think that's generally speaking, I reckon, what's going on. A little sermonette or little psychology lesson or whatever. But I think generally speaking, that's what we see. We see it in our, I mention it all the time in my podcast, but the study that they did in prisons where they looked at very progressive churches that are at much later stages than conventional. And they sent them into prisons and they said, go do your thing, see if you can get people saved and whatever. And they studied the people that got saved. They studied when they came out of prison, did they stay in church and did they end up back in prison? And then they looked at traditional churches and says, you do the same thing. And you and I maybe look at that and go, well, obviously the progressive churches that maybe understand restorative justice and they're maybe a little bit more progressive, they're more loving, they're more inclusive, they're a bit more savvy, they maybe understand science and all these things, they'll do better, right? And they do terribly. They do really badly. And they have high recidivism. People that, even the few people that get saved and come out and go into their churches and go back into prison really quickly on the whole. But people that get saved in these traditional churches, somewhere like the Southern Baptist, they've got great prison ministries in a lot of ways. They kind of don't go back into prison. They kind of get plugged into a community and find safety and security and stability. And generally speaking, people that land in prison, not all people, there's a lot of reasons people end up in prison, but a lot of them coming out really are looking for stability. And that's one of the main things that will cause you not to go back into prison. And so I think, it's just really interesting. It's fascinating why these things happen. But I think we'll see it less and less as we continue to grow as a species and evolve. I think Christianity as a conventional method is not going to serve very well.
No, absolutely not.
But that's my opinion. I'm sure many Christians would disagree, especially the progressives. The progressive Christians all have their ideological future Christianity.
So I don't. So are you not a Christian anymore? I don't know.
I don't label myself. People can label me however they want. I wouldn't call myself progressive Christian. I don't feel the need to tie myself down to one kind of view or belief or set of spiritual kind of principles. And so I take what helps from all kinds of spiritualities and secular humanistic kind of perspectives and forge my own path that kind of helps me frame meaning in the world and stuff like that. I don't know. How would you describe yourself?
Well, I definitely tell people I'm not a Christian anymore. And the general answer would be, I'm spiritual, and some days I'm atheist on a bad day, and on a hopeful day I'm agnostic. So so
what are you hopeful of with your agnosticism? You don't know, but you hope maybe.
Whenever we're trying to pursue something, pursuing a goal, then I believe there's got to be something out there that's helping me achieve this goal. But then when the goal doesn't happen, then I'm like, oh, there's no God. There's nothing.
Screw you, universe.
Exactly.
You inanimate piece of crap.
None of this stuff is working. And I've explored a lot of different spiritualities, like the whole law of attraction, manifestation community, and a little bit of astrology as well. And I don't know. I think I was attracted to that because some people in the deconstruction community have criticized the spiritual community because they say it's just like Christianity. But I feel like I was attracted to that community because at least I can forge my own path. At least I can have my own destiny. I have the choice to do whatever I wanted, as opposed in the Christian world, you don't get a choice. God chooses that for you. Or if you have parents who are really Christian, especially if your dad is a pastor, then God has given the path for your life to your father. So your father knows the path for your life. And so that's why I was really drawn to the spiritual community. And because I felt like I was given permission for the first time to think for myself and to forge my own path, to go for my own goals and my dreams in life, which is something that I never felt like I could have in the Christian world.
Yeah. Did you ever consider exploring traditions from your background as a Filipino woman? Like, you know, did you ever consider like what were the indigenous kind of spiritualities and faiths of my people before they were colonized, right? Because you mentioned, oh yeah, people in Philippines, that they're Southern Baptists. And it's like, probably not that long ago. That was not an option, right? That wasn't on the choice of tickets in the Philippines, really. Like if you go back a few hundred years.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm definitely on this decolonizing journey, and I still have so much to learn. Just like realizing that, like a few years ago, I wasn't even aware, or I didn't even think that my ancestors were indigenous. Like I just never thought about it. Like I knew that the Spaniards ruled over the Philippines for like 300 years and brought Catholicism, and then even Filipinos to this day, you know, like they're hardcore Catholics and they don't want to let that go. And they actually criticize people to that become Protestant. Like there's this really famous boxer named Manny Pacquiao that used to be Catholic, but then he converted to basically evangelicalism, and the whole country was just like, oh, that's why you're losing in your matches now, because you're not Catholic anymore. Like you betrayed the Catholic faith. And so it's very, they hold on to their Catholic views. And so there is a question going around in the Filipino community that the people who want to decolonize. The question is, can a Filipino still practice Catholicism and still decolonize? Can a Filipino decolonize and still practice Catholicism? Right. So that's a question that's being discussed right now in the Filipino community. And some people say yes, and some people say no, absolutely not. So
sure. Yeah, I know I've had this conversation with Jo as well, because obviously she's very vocal about kind of being Christian still and holding to kind of more liberation theology and stuff. But obviously, you know, from her background, being a Colombian woman, like that, if you go back far enough, that wasn't Christian, right? That again was the Spaniards and other people like coming in and bringing that.
Our stories are very similar. Basically, the entire South America, and then obviously some parts of Asia, like the Philippines, all ruled by Spaniards. They had sex with all the native indigenous people there and brought their own language. So yeah, it's a very similar story.
And it's a really complex one as well, I guess, because culture does evolve in a sense, you know. So even if you go back before Christianity was there, what someone would have practiced spiritually in the Philippines 500 years ago versus what they practiced 6,000 years ago, or whenever, you know, people first kind of landed on the shores of the Philippines, that probably had changed over time and become different and evolved. And so I think there's a natural part of things changing and evolving. But suddenly when you have people coming in from a very external place and going, okay, no choice, you are just becoming this, it's hard for people to come to terms with the fact that, well, this is part of my culture now. You go 300 years in, you know nothing else.
Yeah.
And yet, and for many people, there is no indigenous beliefs to fall back onto. It's just been wiped out. I don't know what that looks like in the Philippines. Are there communities that still hold to kind of like very traditional kind of beliefs? And,
there's still people in the mountains that practice the indigenous beliefs that the Spaniards never conquered. They didn't want to. They stayed mostly on the coastal areas. I've heard they didn't want to go into the mountains. It was like too hard to reach them, I guess. I don't know.
I mean, I don't want to go up a mountain, so I get it. Like that sounds like hard work.
Yeah. So there are definitely parts, indigenous tribes in the Philippines that the Spaniards weren't able to conquer or to touch, and so there are still people. And I think another really complicated aspect to decolonize is the fact that Filipinos, like before the term Filipino, there wasn't Filipinos, right? Because the colonizers gave Filipinos that name.
Right.
But to take it a step further, the indigenous Filipinos are actually they're no longer the indigenous people they're no longer that pure race, because a Filipino is actually half Spaniard, half
Sure.
indigenous.
Yeah.
So I think that's still a hard conversation to have with other Filipinos who want to decolonize, because no, you're actually half Spaniard. So what part of you are you decolonizing? And
Right.
because now you're half your colonizer.
Wow.
So it's a tough conversation
That's
that I haven't.
complex.
It's very complex.
Mm.
Oh Lordy, because that's the identity of a Filipino, is an
Yeah.
indigenous person from those islands and a Spaniard. Like, we have Spanish blood running through our veins, and so I don't know the answer to that, but it's something that I've become aware of in the last few weeks.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I've never thought of that overly as a
And
concept of, yeah, like
it's
this
gonna be the same in all
double
of
whammy.
South America and all of Latin America. It's in Central America. It's gonna be the same thing. So, and
Yeah.
Mexicans, because living in California, it's funny because our cultures are so similar, and our food is similar. Like, our language is similar, the type of food we eat is similar, and they're the same. They're half indigenous, and then they're half Spaniard.
Yeah.
And so I don't know.
It's a really weird component. You know, you look at someone like a white nationalist, it's like, oh, we're terrified of white people being lost because so many people from different backgrounds are getting together and marrying, and they're terrified of, like, you know, this concept. And yet there's this weird dynamic of, like, we are slowly, as we evolve as a human species, we're crossing borders constantly, we're meeting new people, we're mixing with new groups, and part of who we are, our identity, is getting more and more blurry and kind of confusing and gray, right? Because I'm married to an English person, I'm Scottish, okay, so we're not far apart, but you know what? That's a pretty big rivalry. Those two don't usually click very well, right? Historically.
Right.
And so what is our kid now? Is it Scottish? Is it English? Well, I don't know, right? But that's way more complex when you start to go, oh yeah, and now there's my friend who's Scottish, who's married to someone from Uganda. So what's their kid? Are they Scottish? Are they from Uganda? Like, what traditions and what, like, values do they hold and bring from their tradition? Like, that becomes messy. And then you do this millions of times over multiple generations, over healthy unions across borders can happen, of course, in lots of amazing and wonderful ways. And then you throw in very unhealthy mixes, right? Where you go, the Spaniards coming into our village and raping and plundering and killing us. That's less healthy, not so healthy as, you know, like you meet at the airport and you go, oh my gosh, you like Chipotle too, you know, or whatever, and you go on a date and it's amazing, it's beautiful. That's a different story. But on the whole, this whole conversation of our identity, our tradition, you know, going back to our roots, is such a complex thing that I think we often don't talk about the complexities of that and how to navigate that. You know, it's weird.
Yeah, and
I say I'm definitely talking about probably me as a white person that doesn't have to think about a lot of these things.
I mean, so I think white people should decolonize too, because my husband is half Polish, a quarter Dutch, and a quarter Danish. And even in that whole area of Europe, you know, I know they had their own, like the Dutch and Danish, they had their own, they were Vikings, right? I think like they had their own gods.
Huge colonization.
And yeah. So I think white people should decolonize too. Absolutely. Like their own heritage. But so my children are, so yeah, they're half Filipino, half white, basically. But I've been having conversations with other kids that are biracials because I brought these biracial humans into the world. So I'm responsible for their mental health now that I wasn't aware of. I wasn't aware of all of these issues that can happen when you're biracial. And so I'm learning to teach them that, no, you're not like half Filipino and half white. You are Filipino and you are white. You're both.
Perfect.
And so I want to teach my children that they're not half of something. They're both. They're both whole parts. But what you said about like, what was I going to say? You said a lot of things that I could totally unpack. But I wanted to say, like, why is it important for us to learn about our heritage? Like, why is it important for us to learn about our ancestors? And for me, it's important for me because we need to learn about like, people go into their childhood to heal from their trauma and to realize, like, why am I the way I am, right? So when someone starts to wonder that about themselves, they go to a therapist and their therapist asks them, well, how did you grow up? How was your childhood, right? But I would take it a step further and say, not only go into your childhood, go into your ancestors. Because when you learn about your ancestors and all the struggles that they went through, that's where you're going to find your limiting beliefs. Like how you perceive the world. And this is not just about like religion, but your own philosophy of like how things work in the world, you know. And for me, I found that the limiting beliefs that my parents had, even just in the last 50 years or century, is that they have to come to America because there wasn't abundant life in the Philippines, right? Like, immigrants come to America in the reason, or the entirety of American history, I guess, is for a better life, right? Because they weren't able to live the life that they could in their country. But if these colonizers didn't come to these other countries, then it's like they wouldn't have needed to leave. Like, if they were just left alone, then they wouldn't have needed to leave. So I guess that's like the bigger picture, like the zoomed out picture. But I think like the zoomed in picture is, for me, is that so my parents came here because they weren't able, there's not like a lot of opportunities in the Philippines. And since there's a lot of people, and there's a lot of people because the government is corrupt. And why is the government corrupt? Because they're taking money from the people, right? We had the famous president, Marcos, if you heard of him. He was a dictator basically in the Philippines for like 20 years. And even though they actually have elections there, some people compare him to Trump, actually. So it's kind of funny. And to him, and also Duarte, who was the current president. But anyway, there's a dictatorship there, and he was taking all the money from the people, and his wife was like buying a zoo. She bought a zoo. She transported. Wow. Yeah, it's crazy. I saw this documentary. She transported animals like giraffes and zebras from Africa and had them shipped to the Philippines, and she commandeered an island there that people were living, and she put the animals there, and they're still there to this day. But
it's crazy. That's a documentary I want to watch. But
it's called The Kingmaker. I'll message you about it later. But my point is that where did they get that idea to conquer? Right. And I think they got that idea from colonizers, right? Because before colonizers were there, they were just tribal people minding their own business. I'm sure they had their own issues with different tribes and everything, but Filipinos wouldn't have had to hustle so hard and to get to another dream promised land if colonizers weren't there in the first place. So it's just like, I don't know, there's just a lot to unpack. Like, I'm learning about the difference between having an abundance mindset and a scarcity mindset. And yeah, there's definitely a lot of scarcity mindsets in third world countries. And I wouldn't say it's their fault though, you know. But anyway,
there's so much in it though, of course. Like I'm learning more and more of my heritage, and Scottish people are proud people. And we were probably some of the first countries colonized, right? Or some of the first regions in the UK. I mean, England took over Scotland before they even started tackling half the world, you know, but they got a quarter of the world under their wing. England, 1/4 of the world. That's unbelievable. 25% of landmass belonged to England because they rocked up, stuck a flag in there, shot all the guys, raped all the women. Like, you know, it's colonization. But we were heavily involved in that. Scottish people, we don't have a say in it, but I imagine there's plenty of Scottish people that were like, yeah, this is part of who we are. We were proud as well. We're part of this empire, and, you know, like, and we were part of that. And I look at I watched a documentary recently on the KKK, and I found out, gosh, it was Scottish people that started the KKK. It was these Scottish landlords in the South that after slavery had been ended and the emancipation, and they went, we're not comfortable with this because we have all these black slaves. We don't like that that's changing. We feel disempowered. We've got this huge properties and lands, and suddenly there's a lot of black people that we don't own them, and there's no one working on them, and there's a lot of them and not many of us, and we don't have the power over them anymore. And so they started these reigns of terror through the KKK, and it was Scottish landlord owners. And as you look at this, and it's so unstabilizing to go, oh, this is part of my country, my nation. There's something in who we are that is capable of that and desire to do that. I don't know. I'm not saying if I was a Scottish person that far ago and I moved to America, I'd do the same thing, but I probably would have, right? I mean, that probably would have been my story. And just coming to terms with that and then going, oh, how have Scottish people benefited from that system? How have Scottish people harmed through those systems? And trying to figure out, how do I even become responsible to make reparations for that and things like that? It's an absolute, it's a minefield. And as a whole, for a Scottish person, it's relatively simple, right? So I'm explaining how complex this feels for me trying to process, but I'm like, you know what? I'm some white Scottish guy that I can trace my family on both sides, and it's pretty much Scottish the whole way. Occasionally an English person or something sneaks in, but it's basically Scotland. But it does get complex when you, like you say, you go, no, I am Filipino and I am Spanish. That's part of my tradition, those two. But gosh, you speak to most Americans and they're like, well, I'm like 1/16 Italian and I'm an 1/8 this and I'm a quarter that. And you're like, geez, that's a lot of stuff to, if you're going to do the work and look back and go, what's part of my story? What's part of what made my family who we are? And what are those stories that went through our generations and shaped how I grew up and the way I see the world? That's a complex story for a huge portion of people, especially in a settled land, somewhere like America, where people were coming from there's people already there. And then a whole bunch of people from very different places all show up as well. Like it's a hotbed for a very complex backgrounds for most people there, unless you're a really racist Scottish people that would only sleep with Scottish people, right? But yeah,
it's definitely a lot of hard work. It's not for the meek in heart.
No, I honestly, I'm constantly aware of this. Like I remember talking to Joe about it last year when I was continuing to dive into anti-racism work, and I was telling her, I'm like, I got myself into a state where I was so stressed, I wasn't like able to I was waking up feeling tired and stressed because I wasn't even sleeping well. And it's because I was spending hours and hours trying to do anti-racist work and dive deep. And I also decided to do anti-sexist work at the same time because I was like, well, I should just do it. And it was a lot. And I was like, I'm on the wrong side of both of these, right? And it's so exhausting. And I look at someone who's actively doing this work, and you have decolonization on two whole separate components to deal with, and you have been on the other end of much worse things, right? You have been on the receiving end of white supremacy and all these kind of toxic components. You've been on the receiving end of the patriarchy. There's all these different components. It must be utterly exhausting. I think it's a thing that I just think as a white person, I can't fathom what it's like, how exhausted I get trying to read some books and understand for a few weeks versus living it nonstop.
I mean, I think it's, and I think it's going to be exhausting for anyone that isn't aware in the first place. There's so many things that I'm unaware of. I'm unaware of the queer experience. I don't know what it's like to be queer. I don't know.
Sure.
That's an experience that I'm unaware of. But as people are willing to, I think, I appreciate white people like you that are willing to learn though, and are willing to listen to people of color like me. And that's honestly really encouraging to me because people of color in America cannot dismantle white supremacy. Like we need white people to dismantle white supremacy, not just in America, but all over the world. So yeah, absolutely. We do need allies. And it's going to take, and I posted a post on my personal Facebook page last year when BLM was happening. And I expressed that, like white people only listen to white people. and some people were really offended by that. And they're like, no, I listen to people of color all the time, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, obviously there's like exceptions. But my general point was that white people have the biggest influence right now in America. And even people of color listen to white people. So if it's anyone that's going to make major changes in this country, it's going to be white people. Like, and we need white people to be our allies. We don't need to be bashing white people. Like, we need them to be on our side and to understand and who are willing to listen and who we're willing to work with and to learn from each other's experiences. And so, and yeah, it takes like all cultures and all races to be aware of everything. But I really do feel like white people are still the biggest influence in this country, in America. And so that's why we do need white people to continue to speak up, to continue to do the anti-racist work. Because I posted recently on my page that I can't, every time I've talked about white privilege with a white person, like their fragility just reeks, especially when I talked about it with some white evangelicals from the church that I was attending pre-COVID. You know, I was like talking to them on Instagram and Facebook last summer and everything. It was just like a huge mess and they weren't listening to me. And, you know, it was heartbreaking because these were people that I've been going to Bible study with for like 5 years and our children have played together. And so, yeah, and I'm sure a lot of people have lost friendships over the last year or so, but it's like I didn't want, it's not, the point wasn't to like offend them. It was, the point was you have, like, white people have the biggest influence in this country right now. And I just don't understand why a white person would be offended by that. But
it's tough. As a very fragile person, I am constantly aware of that thing that rises in me that goes, not me. What do you mean I'm like that? What do you mean? Like, I'm not listening. What do you mean? Like that thing that rises in me that wants to defend myself, to posture myself, to be right all the time and be the most powerful person in the room and all of that stuff. Like, God, I get it. Like, so I don't know what that is in me. Like, it's white supremacy. It's patriarchy. It's a whole bunch of things. Let's blame the Scottish. You know, but like, you know, that is in me, and I see it. And it does. It's scary to see, and yet I kind of have got to the point now where I'm almost excited when I spot it. I'm almost like, oh, look, fragility. Like that's cool. Like I like that. Like, because it's something I can spot and go, oh, there's something.
Because you're aware of it.
I'm learning right now, and there's an opportunity for me if I can be the big boy in my big pants and go, oh, I don't have to throw a temper tantrum right now. I don't have to try and shut down this conversation because it's making me uncomfortable. What I have to do is lean in further and go, why is this making me uncomfortable? Like, what is it in me that is being exposed here that I need to change? And that's not to brag and say I do it all the time. Most of the time, I probably shut down. It's maybe in one ear and out the other. I'm so aware of those components in me, those defensive kind of mechanisms that are like, you don't want to go there right now, Phil. Like, you don't have the capacity, or I'm scared, and it's maybe a lot of it is subconscious. I do think so much of our issues with race are they're implicit issues, systemic issues that most of the time are very subconscious. You know, and I think that's the problem for a lot of white fragility. I think people are like, well, I'm not walking around like in a white hood saying the N-word and you know, being terribly racist. And it's like, no, of course you're not. Actually, most people aren't. Welcome to the real world. Let's move on and have a conversation that's based in 2020. What does racism look like more often now? Right? Like, we're not talking about what does racism look like in the 1930s, you know, like, let's grow up here. I'm not accusing you of that. But I think there's something in me that is so upset with that, you know, like, I'm so aware of that. And I think, we've got a lot of work to do.
Yeah. And like, that's why I think, it's absolutely so important for white people to decolonize because of just what you said. Like, you don't know why you're feeling this way. And it's because of your ancestors. It's because of the mentality that your ancestors have had this whole time. And that's like brought down to you from generations to generations. And that's why you feel that way. And so, but as you continue to learn and be aware and decolonize, you know, and I see that you've been already doing that work, you know, I feel like that's good,
I'm not looking for compliments, but thank you. I do appreciate that. But do you feel hope with it though? Do you look around? Because there's a thing of, you're going, gosh, we need white people, right? Because let's be honest, right? Maybe Biden's a bit better than Trump, but let's be honest, who's Biden going to listen to, right? This old white guy. He's going to listen to some other old white guys,
Democratic
right?
Party,
And certainly, if we go back to someone that's on the other side of the aisle, we're going to need some white people to be talking to that president that's making rules. And the senators that are voting, we need some white people influencing them, whatever that is, right? Whether it's rich businesses greasing their wheels or whatever, it's going to be white people. And I guess, do you look at that and, because it feels like there's a change, the marches that have happened recently around race, it feels like there's so much more white faces in those marches than have ever been in any kind of racial marches in the past. And maybe part of that is very 2020 virtual signaling and
performative.
Yeah, I think that's definitely there. But I do think a big part of it as well is people are waking up. But do you feel hopeful about it? It feels like there's a lot of work to be done. I don't know.
I feel hopeful in when people are starting to deconstruct their faith. That's as far as my hope goes.
Do you think that's not a bigger problem, that is not the right word, but maybe
a big part,
a primary step? Do you think it's possible to decolonize without deconstructing?
Is it possible to, I've heard it the other way. Is it possible to deconstruct without decolonizing? And I think they just go both hand in hand. Like if you just deconstruct your faith, you could still hold up patriarchy. You could still hold up white supremacy. You could still, because when a big part of it is deconstructing the religion in America, because this is still the biggest influence in America. And like up until the last few years, evangelicals were like the, what is it called? Like moral authority in America. Yeah. So evangelicals have a lot of influence on this country. And so my hope is that as people continue to deconstruct and decolonize from Christianity, that we can go into the direction where we can dismantle Christian supremacy, white supremacy, and all of that. But it is, I can't look beyond that point personally.
Right.
I don't know how other
baby
people
steps.
of color feel, but it's definitely baby steps. But I know that I can start with myself. I know I can start with my own family and my own children, and like teaching them and being aware and loving them, and not bringing. I was just thinking about this the other day, like we always want to do better than how our parents raised us, obviously, right? And I can fall into the trap where like I'm never going to be like my parents. I'm never going to do what they did. I'm going to do things like my way, and it's going to be totally better, which is fine. But then I am still going to mess up, and there's going to be some things I'm going to mess up on, and I'm still going to do. But as long as I recognize it now. Yeah. Like I'm more aware of it now. And also I don't want to be naive and think, oh, my children are never going to be harmed. Like nothing bad is going to happen to them, because I'm going to make sure that nothing bad is going to happen to them, which is exactly what my parents were thinking when they were being strict.
Every parent has ever said that. I'm not going to do the same that my parents did.
Yeah. So it's like, I definitely still don't, I know my children are going to be harmed, and they're going to have struggles and hardships in some way. I just hope that, I'm not doing most of it. Like, I hope the harm is not coming from me. Like, if I could just have the harm not come from me, if I can be the safe haven for my children instead of the ones harming them, then I think that's something that I'll be happy with.
Yeah. No, that's how the world changes, right? Like, these incremental changes, if you can just change yourself, that can change. I mean, your kids start from such a further ahead place when that's just like,
Yes.
hey, it was only my school and this and that, and, you know, like TV and all the other things I'm sure that will influence us in different ways. But like, yeah, I mean, that would be a huge deal if you can just tick those boxes. That's nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. It's been so good to chat, Fresca. I'm aware that we're slowly running out of time, but we'll have you back on. Maybe I'll be on time. You know what? I think you're the first person I've been late for, and I feel terrible. I'm like 100 episodes in, and I'm like, oh, so I'm really sorry. I don't know how I managed to.
It's okay.
To just
I thought something.
completely...
Well, I mean, something was going to happen with my kids, so I'm like, I don't know. It's fine.
It's all good. It's all good. Yeah, I have no excuses. This is the thing. You've got kids. Like, that's a good excuse. I don't know, just got distracted talking to my wife. Like, that's not particularly great excuse for being late. But yeah,
it's okay.
It's been really
I'm happy
cool
to be here. Yeah, I'm happy that you asked me to be on here. So I'm grateful, and thanks for having me.
No, it's an honor. Tell people, how can they engage with you, follow you?
Yeah,
you know, you've got your podcast, Instagram, like...
Yeah, so I have an Instagram. I have an Instagram called Confessions of a Pastor's Kid _, no apostrophe. So someone can reach me there. I also have an email, because I know not everyone has Instagram. My email is confessionsofapastorsKid08@gmail.com.
Nice.
So,
I'll get that.
Yeah, that's where people can reach me.
You're so much nicer than me. I literally am like, if you don't have an Instagram, you can set one up. Like, so you've made a backup option for people. That's so funny.
Well,
I literally had someone set
Facebook
up an Instagram the other day for it. Well, neither do I. I hate using Facebook.
I hate Facebook.
I have one set up that automatically posts from Instagram, and I just don't even check it anymore. It's just,
okay,
it's
that's a good idea.
Cesspool. It's just not helpful. So I just stopped checking it, and I was like, yeah, you send me messages on there, I just won't see it. Sign me something on Instagram. But no, that's been great. And so your podcast is called Confessions of a Pastor's Kid as well. Big question I've got for you. Was Confessions of a Pastor's Kid already taken on Instagram that you had to use an underscore?
Yeah,
that's
it
crazy.
Was.
There's a very unique handle.
Yeah, there's a guy that wrote a book, actually. Yeah, but I don't know. He's not very active on it. So
right.
I don't know. I still feel like if someone types in Confessions of a Pastor's Kid, my handle's going to pop up because it's more active.
You're going to win it because you're more active. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the way.
Yeah.
It's just funny, isn't it? It's yeah. It's just funny. Sometimes you're like, wait, oh, that's already taken. That's a pretty unique
it
phrase.
took me a while.
I guess there's a lot of pastors' kids with confessions to make, right?
It took me, I had a list of 10 handles, and I went over them with my husband, and his choice was Naughty Little Church Girl.
Ooh, nice.
I typed in naughty little girl on Instagram, and I was like, immediately all these accounts popped up, and I was like, oh, actually, I don't want to be associated with all these accounts. So I mean, I don't know, maybe I should have chosen that handle, because maybe I would have gone more hits.
Catchy.
You know,
yeah.
It's totally possible. I could have gone that route, but I decided not to. I don't know. I like confessions. Funny. I like Confessions of a Pastor's Kid, because it's like, I don't know. I hope people feel like they're learning about my deepest, darkest secrets.
Absolutely. It draws you in, journal. Right? I want a confession. Like, sign me up for some of that. I literally got a message from someone the other day, and they were like, I'm a pastor's kid, and I'm going to start an Instagram. Like, here's a couple of ideas I have for a name. What do you suggest? And I was like, I don't know. They're both pretty good, or, you know, like whatever. And I literally said, go message like Fresca. And I gave her a few people's accounts that are pastors' kids. I'm like, there's quite a few people out there that are pastors' kids in this space. Not all of them are about being a pastor's kid, but I don't know if they messaged you, but I was just like,
I didn't get that message, but
someone like wanting to like gear it all around being a pastor's kid. And I was like, you're the person I know that is doing it. I'm a pastor's kid, everyone. Most of us pastor kids are like, keep your head down. Don't let anyone know. That was my life growing up. Do not tell anyone you're a pastor's kid.
Well, that's exactly why I made it about being a pastor's kid, because I didn't find any accounts that were about being a pastor's kid. And like one part of it is probably like, oh, maybe because they're still really in touch with their family and they don't want to, like, you know, come out. It's a very big thing. And so, yeah, that's why I wanted to start one. I was like, I have to start one, you know? So,
you know, the pastor's kids are like, I want to follow Confessions of a Pastor's Kid. Like, oh,
yeah,
the
I
shit
have
we
at
can
least,
say.
yeah, I've gotten to meet a lot of other pastors' kids that resonate with my
That's
story.
awesome.
And it's been really cool because, yeah, for so many years I was in the dark. I didn't know there was another pastor's kid that felt the same way as I did. I knew
Right.
pastors' kids in my life and that I've known through my whole life, but I didn't have the courage to ask them, hey, are you feeling this way too? Are you
Yeah.
questioning God? Are you
Yeah.
not like into this as we're, you know, as we're
And
supposed
there's
to
a
be or
pressure
whatever?
for
Like,
us to perform, to be seen. This, how
mm-hmm.
much do you hear? Well, certainly not the pastor's kid, or like, oh, well, they're the pastor. And you're like, I am not superhuman. I am
Yeah,
not the person you think I am. And yeah, it seems I have to try
exactly.
and pretend that. And so, like, even more so, you don't see the questioning, but pastors kids
Yeah.
deconstruct hard, like hard
Yeah.
and fast.
Yeah, we do. But anyway, yeah.
No, it was
So
great to chat, Fresca. Thank you so much for coming
yeah.
on. I really appreciate it. And we'll chat again for sure. And we'll stay in touch anyway,
Okay. Yeah.
obviously.
Thanks
But
for
I'll
having
let you know
me.
when this
All
comes
right.
out. I'm kind of juggling the next few weeks, but it'll be soon. I think
Sure.
it'll be either next week or the week after. But yeah.
Okay.
All right.
No problem. All right. Have a
Catch
good
you later.
day.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye. If you are deconstructing, there is no reason to do this alone. It can be an incredibly lonely process, but the deconstructionnetwork.com is a free resource to help you find others deconstructing in your local area. If you would like to support what I do, everything I do is for free, from talking to people for hours on end to producing resources and podcasts. It is only possible because people give generously. There's never any need to give. It will always be free, everything I do. But if you do, we do have an amazing private community group that we talk on over on Discord that you would gain access to. And we do regular audio and video chats on there as well. So it'd be great to see you in there. But of course, never any requirement. And of course, please, please, please come and talk to me on Instagram. I love connecting with people. I love helping people on their journey. If you need a safe space to process your deconstruction, I would love to connect. It's just at Phil Drysdale. Love every one of you. Peace.